The Winnipeg Jets have made a lot of trades over the years, some of them good, some of them bad, some of them you probably don't remember because who cares about the Eddie Pascal trade. But obviously, ranking these is going to be fun. We're going to talk through the best, mid, and worst trades all on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. As always, thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. But most of all, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more because right now new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That is $150 if your team wins. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Now, like I said, obviously tonight's episode, going to be doing a little bit of a fun one. The Jets have a late game against New Jersey, so I'm going to have to probably watch it back a little bit and give you thoughts on tomorrow's episode. In the meantime, though, I wanted to leave you with some fun thoughts based on the conversation folks were having earlier about the Niederreiter trade, right? Where does this rate in Winnipeg's trade tiers? Some have suggested it might be the best trade the Jets have ever made, and I think that's a pretty interesting one because honestly, the Jets have made some surprisingly good deals over the years. Let's roll back probably 7 years. Oh, gosh, 10 years now. My bad. It's been a long time. 10 years ago, the Jets traded for Michael Frolik. And I don't think at the time that they expected Frolik to become as pivotal a player as he did in Winnipeg's, not only like some of their playoff runs, but really as a part of their core. He was kind of like the traded for Matthew Perreault. What made Frolik really effective was the fact that he just was so versatile. He could do whatever you asked of him. He was a great two-way player, an excellent complementary winger, a quality scorer, and somebody who I felt was legitimately underappreciated. If you can believe it, he only cost a third and a fifth round pick. Frolik played a long time with the Jets. It seems kind of strange to think now that he's 35 and he's actually playing in the Czech League, if you can believe it. I'd always been curious to know what he was up to these days, but he's spent a good couple of seasons with the Jets. The 2014 and 2015 seasons that he had were really, really strong. Unfortunately, he ended up with the Flames and spent a lot of time there. It would have been nice if things had worked out between him and the Jets, but they ended up jettisoning him and kind of let him go. And, it is what it is. But for the couple of seasons that the Jets had Frolik, he was a really, really fantastic player, kind of like getting a really cheap Matthew Perreault. Another really good trade that I would probably rank in like the best tier is the Kane trade, not because, it was like an amazing deal for Winnipeg. I don't think the value that the Jets got is quite like as exciting as you'd hope. But getting a first-round pick, Joel Armia, Lemieux, Stafford, and Myers for Bogosian, Kane, and Kasdorf, probably about as good as you were going to do if you were making a deal to get rid of a team player who was considered a cancer in the locker room. And the value that the Jets got back was interesting because Myers at first was really good. Drew Stafford, we pretty much knew what he was going to be, which was kind of an empty calorie scorer, somebody with a great finishing talent, but perhaps wasn't as well-versed in some of the other areas of the game. Joel Armia was probably the one with the most promise in terms of being like a decent middle six player. I don't know that he was ever really that impressive for the Jets. I know that his stint with the Canadians over the past several years was not too bad, but he didn't really, I would say, become like this amazing power forward. He was just a really solid middle six grinder with some forechecking ability. So really the first round pick was probably the most important part of all of that. But other than that, the Jets didn't really. This wasn't the kind of trade where you got like massive value in return. You just wanted to get a number of pieces to kind of replace some roster holes and get rid of somebody who, at the time, again, was considered a locker room cancer. And the Jets did pretty all right. I would say that ranks as one of their best trades in terms of the situation that they faced and what they kind of got in return. It wasn't like the kind of deal that's going to change Winnipeg's fortunes forever, but you know what? It wasn't half bad. Another trade that I'm going to rank as one of the surprising best, this one maybe a little bit under the radar, is Carl Klingberg for Lee Stempniak. Stempniak was actually fantastic for the Jets in his very brief stint. Obviously didn't play all that many games. I think he had like 20-something or maybe even less at the end of it. But in those games that he played for the Jets, he was a pivotal part of their final push for the playoffs. He had a couple of really nice opportunities in the actual postseason itself. And I think, wasn't he the one who scored the first Jets home goal, if I recall correctly? Pretty awesome. And I honestly wanted them to stick around, but unfortunately the Jets decided otherwise and didn't bring him back. Really sucks. But Stempers was awesome, and all he cost was an AHL winger. So a really, really fantastic trade. Now, the one that I think most people are going to point to as being perhaps the best is Paul Stastny for a 2018 first-rounder, Eric Frolik, and a 2020 fourth-round pick. Stastny spent several years with the Jets and was one of our most creative and effective two-way centers. His passing and vision and his actually surprisingly underrated scoring touch made him an instant fan favorite. And he really was pretty darn great. In terms of what he could bring, whatever you asked of him, whether it was on the power play or at even strength, he was quite honestly a bit of a menace. A great player, really solid, and, his tenure with the Jets maybe didn't end with the happiest of separations, but overall, that was about as good as it gets when it comes to a deadline rental who ended up becoming a pretty pivotal part of Winnipeg's core for the next several years. Now, the trade that I think a lot of people are going to say is like maybe the best is Niederreiter for a second rounder, which that one pretty darn good. I got to say, Niederreiter looks like an absolute steal. And for a 2024 second rounder, it wasn't even this year. You really couldn't go wrong. A fantastic acquisition. Niederreiter has fit in perfectly, and the Jets have done well. Now, my personal favorite overall trade might be this Dubois thing, because I really feel like Velarde is going to be a menace. I really like Iafallo, and Kupari seems like he's got some jump. And actually, there's also a 2024 second rounder in there as well, all for a player who didn't want to stick around and re-sign. I got to say, for what the Jets kind of were facing with the situation, overall, Winnipeg did about as well as you could and got, some really interesting players who can not only help in the present, but also very likely in the future over the next few years, especially as the Jets continue to keep this competitive window open. Now, in the middle of all of this, there are obviously some trades that I would still want to talk about as being really good, and then some kind of mediocre trades, maybe some ones that were a little bit less ideal. We'll talk about those, plus our favorite topic, which is the worst trades, all coming up in just a little bit. Before we go any further, though, I did want to shout out our friends and partners at Jace Medical. You and I spend a lot of time talking together, and we get fired up together on the same wins, our losses, who sits, who starts, and I'm thankful that you always take the time to listen and share in the experience of Winnipeg Jets fandom with me. Today, I want our chat to be a little more personal, though. I just learned that you can get a 1-year supply of ED medications. You realize what that means? Those of you who might be on the bounce a lot, this is great for extended travel, bring on the next natural disaster, or supply chain issue. You're always covered, and Jace Medical offers you some great replacement prescriptions for generics like Cialis, Viagra, and Revatio prescriptions. This is possible because our friends at Jace Medical have a great program set up. All you have to do is go online right now at jacemedical.com to receive your 12-month supply of your daily medications. Remember to use promo code LOCKEDON at checkout for a discount as well. A verified customer had this to say about Jace. I'm thankful for the service. Supply chain issues caused me to cut pills in half just to make it through. I ordered most of my daily meds with a year supply, and they also picked up the antibiotic kit. I feel secure now. Prices are lower than local pharmacies, and I highly recommend this for everyone. If you or someone you would love to get some peace of mind by having a year's supply of any medication, go to jacemedical.com to see if it's offered for you. Remember to use promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off your purchase. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you for joining us in tonight's episode as we talk about some really interesting and perhaps not so great trades over the past few years for the Jets. One of the last ones that I would really rank as one of Winnipeg's best trades, before we talk about some of the worst ones, is the Andrew Copp trade. The Jets got back 2 second-round picks, including a conditional second that turned into a first if the Rangers won 2 rounds, and they did, and then a 2023 fifth-round pick. And on top of that, they also got Morgan Barron. Going the other way was a 2023 sixth-rounder and Andrew Copp. And considering that was a rental, the Jets did fantastically. Barron looks like a really solid bottom six player. Those picks all went to good use. And obviously the Jets added some organizational depth while dumping a player who, while we all loved Copp and were very excited that he was one of our most important players, he didn't really end up wanting to stick around, and I think we all understood why. I think it made a lot of sense, and trading him ended up being in Winnipeg's best interest. So overall, really solid trade, and I think the Jets got a ton of value back in that exchange. Now, fast forward a bit, let's talk about some of the less ideal trades, stuff that's perhaps not as exciting. One of them, this one you'll have a lot of differing opinions. Right now, people are probably going to laugh because he just scored several goals in like 3 games. But Brendan Dillon for like 2 second-rounders, at the time and even by today's standards, it's still kind of expensive. Now, I'll say this about Dillon. He's been pretty good for the Jets overall. So like in terms of like 2 second-rounders, personally, I don't care that much. I think Brendan has been very solid in the role that he's been assigned. Obviously, there are some limitations to his game that I think perhaps cap him from being like a truly great player, but overall, he's been very solid. In terms of like a defensive anchor for your top 4, he's basically been that. And really, if that's all he does, that's kind of okay. Those second rounders probably weren't going to become much of anything anyways, most likely. So I don't mind if the Jets turned it into a player who can help Winnipeg over the span of several seasons. And that's kind of what Dillon's done. I was a little bit concerned that perhaps this year he was really starting to fall off a cliff, but it seems like he's bounced back a bit. So overall, again, I put this kind of in like the average-ish trade, right? It's not bad. It's not amazing, but it's okay, right? The one that perhaps is not as great is Schmidt for a third rounder. And this one, I just didn't really think it was going to age this poorly this quickly. Schmidt just really kind of fell off almost immediately. I thought that he'd have a couple more seasons before age-related decline really set in, but his skating took a huge hit, and he just has not been the same ever since. I don't know what happened to him, but, he just hasn't been able to keep up. He's really slowed down, and it hurts to see him struggle as much as he has. I mean, it is what it is, right? You're looking at the situation, and he was always going to be a little bit of a gamble. That's why he was only a third-round pick, if we're being honest. In terms of what the Jets were trying to do, I get it, right? He was a mobile, puck-moving D. That was his reputation. That's what it was thought that he was going to bring to the Jets, and it didn't really pan out. But unfortunately, because of his cap hit, the Jets have been stuck a little bit, or a lot of it, depending on how you look at it. And so this trade, I think, for me, has aged really, really poorly. I'm not going to say it's one of the worst trades the Jets have made because I don't really feel like that's fair, but it's just not good. That's all I can say is it's not good. In terms of other mediocre trades, I'll put the Kevin Hayes one up there because I feel like the Hayes one wasn't even a bad trade. In fact, it was actually a pretty great trade at the time. The problem with this one is that the Jets just didn't play him enough. This one kind of became a mediocre to bad trade because the coaching staff just didn't use Hayes. We traded away Lemieux, a 2019 first and a 2019 fourth round pick for, Kevin Hayes to essentially either get benched or become like a fourth liner. And for a guy who then went on to the Flyers for a fifth round pick and became like a top end scorer for the Flyers, really pissed me off in so many ways. It felt like an indictment of the coaching staff. And I get it. Hayes maybe didn't play the sexiest game and perhaps was a little soft on the puck, but to not use a guy who was a naturally gifted scorer to help you score goals when that's what you acquired him for just blew my mind, is all I can say. It blew my mind. That trade aged terribly because the Jets just kind of screwed themselves with that. But thankfully, those days are behind us, and we can kind of look forward on to the future. Now, the next section of trades are going to be ones that are going to be fun because these are going to be ones that are just, you could say, the worst trades. These ones, it might just be more about the quality of player that the Jets acquired and what they ended up doing for this team. And we'll talk about, whether or not it was really worth it, or perhaps if the Jets ended up wasting assets on yet another mid-tier player that just didn't really fit the mold for what Winnipeg really needed. We'll dive into that in just a little bit, but before we go any further, I do want to shout out our friends and partners at FanDuel. Score early this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you're a bit of a gambler, you might be perhaps wanting to test your luck with the NFL this year, which has been chaotic. Maybe you think it's Josh Dobbs' season in Minnesota. Perhaps you're buying into the Houston Texans' recent hot streak. Or maybe you're like me, and you're expecting that the Ravens are going to bounce back after yet another AFC North divisional loss. No matter who you're betting on, though, FanDuel makes it super easy, and there's never been a better time to get in on the action than right now. The app offers a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and so much more. To get started, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season in style. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Every day, thank you for joining us in tonight's episode as we close out with some of the worst trades in Jets history. I'm going to be honest, most of these are probably not really like awful organizationally speaking, just more like the impact that the players had and really whether or not they actually fixed what the Jets needed. I feel like that's kind of the focus of what I would consider a bad trade. So let's start off with one of my least favorite trades. Unfortunately, and this is not really a shot at Beaulieu, but he perhaps was a little bit too beloved by the Jets coaching staff. Beaulieu came over from Buffalo for a sixth-round pick, and at the time, I think a lot of us thought, oh, well, it's just like a depth defender, right? Well, the Jets coaching staff, God bless them, decided to make Beaulieu like a regular fixture, sometimes even on the top pair. He was used so much that I thought I was going to draw my eyes out. Beaulieu always fought for the badge and was a very hardworking player. The problem was that he just wasn't the right kind of defender that the Jets needed. Very physical, threw a lot of checks, and certainly wasn't afraid to stand up for teammates. Unfortunately, just wasn't actually that great of a defender. He was a very old-fashioned blue liner that didn't really fit what the Jets needed, and I think the more that Winnipeg used him, the worse it got. He was put on the PK. He was asked to anchor top pairings at times. It was not a great fit. And look, you can say that, well, it only cost a 6th-round pick, and you're right. Yes, that is true. 6th-round picks almost never make the NHL. But I think in Beaulieu's case, it would have been better just to keep the pick because, to be honest, Beaulieu did so much damage on Winnipeg's blue line that I feel like you basically got negative value. If that's even possible for a 6th-rounder, you got negative value. I kind of look at that in the same way that I look at the Joe Morrow trade, which was like for a 4th-rounder. You're starting to see a bit of a recurring theme with Winnipeg. The Jets have this really bad habit of like trading for 7th defenders and actually spending picks on them. Now, If it's like a seventh defender who sits in the press box and is only there for injury insurance, no problem. The thing with guys like Morrow and Beaulieu, though, is that the Jets actually wanted them, and the coaching staff used them like a lot. And that kind of created problems with this team because a lot of those guys could not move the puck and defensively were really struggling mightily. Look, they all fought hard. They all loved playing for the Jets, and I'll never really begrudge them for that. But I will say that defensively, it was kind of a train wreck. And players like that, the Jets were so used to acquiring these guys because they were cheap and because they didn't really cost any assets. And so Winnipeg was like, well, you basically get what you pay for. They're cheap. They're on league minimum deals. You can't be that bad, right? And no, actually, when they were used as much as they were, yes, they were that bad. So frustrating. Then you add on in 2020, this is one of the funniest trades. I still can't believe this happened. The Jets paid a fourth-round pick for Cody Eakin. And Eakin actually, in hindsight, hated playing for Winnipeg. You could tell that he didn't really want to be there after getting traded from Vegas. And, he gets traded to Winnipeg, which was kind of like a dead-end team at the time, to be honest. I'm sure, going from a squad that looked like it was a Stanley Cup finalist to the Jets was, not the happiest of experiences if you were Cody Eakin. And he was not good, man. Like he got used, I think, even on the power play. The coaching staff sometimes under Maurice really galaxy brain things. And that was not only one of the worst trades the Jets have ever made, but also just one of the worst players I've seen on this team in general. So thank goodness it was a very brief stint and they got rid of him at the end because he was nowhere near good enough to stick around this Jets team. He can say all he wants about the locker room being toxic and all that crap. He also really did not bring enough to this team at all. Last bad trade we'll talk about as one of the worst trades that, again, not really one that matters all that much, but a guy who did actually get used a lot is Jordy Bent for a sixth rounder. Again, Winnipeg with like this whole late round pick for like a depth defender deal. Again, the problem was that they kept being used a lot. Ben played a lot of minutes for the Jets. He was given some pretty big responsibilities, and he didn't really live up to expectations, or at least for the coaching staff, he didn't. For everyone else who knew what he was going to bring to the team and what he was kind of capable of doing, we all sort of understood the game, and he basically met our expectations. Sometimes he dipped below them on really bad days, but otherwise, we all knew that he was like a seventh defender, and that's exactly what you got. So, in a lot of ways, this whole thing of the Jets trading for seventh defenders ended up really hurting the team because they ended up being used in a lot more prominent roles than what I think either Chevy thought they were going to be used for, or I don't know. I can't even begin to describe the reasoning behind this. Whatever the Jets were trying to do back then, they have kind of gotten away from it these days. Crossing fingers that holds this year. Nino Niederreiter and Nemesnikov were fantastic acquisitions for the price the Jets paid. That's the kind of trade that I want to see more often. So if that's what the Jets are going to do going forward, consider me a fan. Let's just stay away from the seventh defender for like a fourth or a fifth round pick. That needs to kind of go away. Unless it's a good player, I'm all ears. But otherwise, let's move forward and go for more talent. So let me know how you rank some of these trades. What are your favorite trades? What are your least favorite ones? I might do a free agency one at some point as well. But for tonight's episode, that is going to be all the time that we have. Thanks so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. We will be back here tomorrow with some coverage on the Devils game, so don't go anywhere. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe. And as always, have a great night, and go Jets go.